Very good evening to one and all. At the outset, may I thank our President, Dr. Vaidehi Marathe Madam, Honorable Secretary, Dr. Rajasi Sengupta Ma'am, and Clinical Secretary, Dr. Sumit Baheti, for giving me an opportunity to present and discuss the very rare case of bladder carcinoma in pregnancy. Dear friends, this is basically a very unusual association, but with a very common clinical presentation. So here I begin. My patient, she is a 30-year-old second gravida, para 1 living one with previous normal delivery 3 years back. At 29 weeks, she had come with complaints of dysuria, increased frequency of micturition, and one episode of red-colored urine past 3 days back. There's no history of pain in abdomen or oliguria. And she had similar complaints at 14 weeks, 20 weeks, and 24 weeks at Bethel, and she was treated with broad-spectrum antibiotics all the 3 times. There is no other significant past history. There's no history of any chemical exposure or tobacco chewing, and there's she gives some history of taking injectables to increase the hemoglobin, probably the iron sucrose. Her hemoglobin was 9.1, and the peripheral smear showed iron deficiency anemia. Rest of the labs were normal. KFT was normal, serum creatinine was normal. Urine routine had shown 20 to 30 pus cells and plenty of RBCs. In view of her previous repeated episodes and this present urinary tract infection, we decided to go in for an ultrasonography. Her ultrasonography, the USG obstetric was USG obstetric was normal with a healthy growing fetus, but the USG KUB had shown a very surprising, a large mass of around 4.5 by 4 centimeter, which was arising from the right lateral wall of urinary bladder with papillary projections. The color Doppler had shown increased vascularity. There were no other satellite lesions, and there was no history of hydronephrosis or hydroureter. There were no enlarged pelvic lymph nodes seen. At this time, we were very clear that we are dealing with a bladder tumor with pregnancy, and the association with the urologist was sought. The opinion was taken. After discussing the whole case with the urologist, plan for cystoscopy with transurethral resection of the bladder tumor was done. Preoperatively, we had counseled the patient and relatives in a lot of depth, and the plan of action was explained. The high risk in terms of preterm delivery or effects on the fetus were explained. Informed consent was taken. Injection ceftriaxone started. Betamol was given 2 doses for the lung maturity. Tocolysis and progesterone support was given to the patient preoperatively. So we decided to do it under regional anesthesia to avoid any effects of the general anesthesia. And on cystoscopy, it showed a papillary growth of around 5 by 3 by 4 centimeter with wide tumor base and increased vascularity. It was a single tumor which was seen, rest of the mucosa was normal. The left ureteric orifice was seen clearly, whereas the right orifice was covered by the bladder tumor. So this transurethral resection started. The growth was resected completely. And after the complete resection of the growth, a muscle biopsy, deep muscle biopsy was taken to look for any invasions. Right ureteric orifice was seen after the complete resection, and the tissue was sent for histopathology. So this was how it looked after the complete resection, and we were really hoping for a complete removal of complete resection of the mass so that the patient doesn't need any further treatment. Post-operatively, progesterone support was continued for 5 more days. Periurethral catheter was kept for 3 days. She had mild hematuria for 24 hours, which later on settled down. The constant fetal heart rate monitoring was normal, and uterus was relaxed throughout preoperatively, intraoperative, and postoperative. The histopathology examination had very fortunately shown a low-grade papillary urothelial carcinoma, and the muscularis propria was free of the tumor. Because the patient had a low-grade lesion without any invasion into the bladder muscle layer, the patient was discharged after the 4 days post-operatively, uneventfully. But at the time of discharge, the patient were very thoroughly counseled for the frequent follow-ups required. So a monthly follow-up of this patient was done with ultrasonography KUB every time and urine routine microscopy. Both the ultrasonography and urine routine was all the 3 times was normal, and cystoscopy was still kept on hold. Post-operatively, she had 2 antenatal visits during which she had no complaints, after which she delivered a vaginally healthy fetus, a male fetus of weighing 3 kgs. And after that also patient had come to us for 1 follow-up. Even that visit, she had no complaints and there was no signs of recurrence on the examinations. So basically coming to the diagnosis, this patient was second gravida, para 1 living one with 29 weeks of gestation with low-grade papillary urothelial carcinoma of bladder, stage 1, which was treated with transurethral resection of bladder tumor. Now coming to the discussion part, basically these are the papillary tumors. These are very uncommon, unusual, and the frequency of the neoplasias is very less, that is 1 in 1000 pregnancies. But basically these bladder tumors are often mistaken for the common benign lesions such as cystitis or even endometriosis and obstetric conditions complicating pregnancies like antepartum hemorrhage. Cigarette smoking, frequent urinary tract infections, and environmental chemical carcinogens exposure are the most important risk factors for bladder carcinoma. 90% of the cases which come with a bladder carcinoma below the age of 40 years, they are mostly papillary urothelial neoplasm of low malignant potential. So it's a very good thing that if they come with it, the treatment is simple. These papillomas can either be only papilloma, which are also called as transitional cell carcinomas, or they can be precancerous, which are the papillary urothelial neoplasm of low malignant potential, low-grade papillary or high-grade papillary urothelial carcinoma. The staging depends upon how aggressive the spread of the bladder carcinoma is. Stage 0 is there will be hardly any involvement of the bladder mucosa with few mitotic cells, but not the complete of the mucosa. Stage 1 is the involvement of the complete bladder mucosa. Stage 2 is along with mucosa, the bladder muscle is involved. Stage 3 is the nearby organs like uterus and vagina are involved. And stage 4 is spread to the lymph nodes and other parts of the body. So basically this patient which had come into stage 1 was the tumor had grown into the mucosa, but it had not reached the muscle layer into the bladder. Basically, I would like to mention here that even in pregnant women, the bladder carcinoma should be staged with MRI and not with CT scan. Now in our patient, basically it was a single nodule. The margins were very well defined. There were no other lesions seen anywhere in the bladder. No lymph nodes were seen. So in this case, we did not do the MRI of the patient. When coming to the management, stage 1 cancers are generally treated with transurethral resection of bladder tumors with or without intravesical therapy. The intravesical therapy basically involves immunotherapy or chemotherapy, BCG or mitomycin. But since both are contraindicated in the pregnancy, none of these intravesical therapies can be done during the pregnancy, and we have to wait for either patient to deliver if she is near term, or if it's very early pregnancy and it is an invasive carcinoma, we'll have to think of terminating the pregnancy if we have to give the intravesical therapy. Although the transurethral resection of the non-invasive bladder carcinoma can be performed safely either during pregnancy or after delivery. Anytime during the pregnancy, the transurethral resection can be done easily. Now, why I say that immunotherapy also cannot be given is because where we want a very sterile urine of the patient, even if we recommend to treat asymptomatic bacteriuria also at this in such a condition, immunosuppressed state of the pregnancy, we really don't want to inject the live attenuated bacteria into the maternal bladder and create sepsis. So definitely it's a big no for any intravesical therapy during the pregnancy. Now, how to manage these cases is a $1 million question. Even now, like Sulva Joshi ma'am has already said, there are no particular guidelines for the management of bladder carcinoma in pregnancy because whatever cases have been reported, firstly, there are very few cases which are reported, and whatever have been reported, they are either single cases or a series of 2 to 3. So we really need a larger case series study to define the guidelines on how to do on the management of the bladder carcinoma during pregnancy. But in a nutshell, basically it will all depend upon at what gestation the patient is presenting with bladder carcinoma and what is the staging of the bladder carcinoma. So if we are looking at the maternal point favor, we have to, whether we are focusing both on the mother and the baby, the whole management will all depend upon what gestation the mother is presenting with. So the survival rate in the non-invasive carcinoma is really good as opposite to the invasive carcinomas. Now, in these cases, even the non-invasive ones, the follow-up is very important because they are highly recurrent. The recurrence rate is very high, and a second look cystoscopy is must at 6 months, even if the patient is not showing any signs of recurrence till then, because we generally follow up with the patient for at least 6 months, monthly follow-up with an ultrasonography and urine routine microscopy. But even if the patient has no complaints and these investigations are normal, a second look cystoscopy must be performed at 6 months. Thorough discussion with the patient and explaining them the importance of follow-up is must because the recurrence rate is very high. So basically the take-home message is despite the rarity of the bladder carcinoma during pregnancy, an examination of urinary bladder including urine routine microscopy and an ultrasonography is must, and it should be performed in cases of repeated UTIs or if the patient is presenting with any atypical genital bleeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati. Really an excellent presentation. It is such a rare case.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Actually, if this patient would have come to you in first trimester or second trimester, when patient had urinary symptoms,
yes, ma'am.
And if the urinary examination is done, it shows microscopic hematuria.
Yes.
What would have you done?
Ma'am, if at that moment, if the patient had presented with such a large mass, even then we would have definitely planned a transurethral resection, and the further management would have depended whether the muscle invasion was there or not. If the muscle invasion was there and it had come in the first trimester, we could have given an option of termination to the patient, because then at that time the chemotherapy part is very important if there's muscle invasion. And if the patient is coming in stage 3 or stage 4, definitely we'll have to terminate at whatever gestation the patient is, because then it will involve a radical surgery, including radical cystectomy. So definitely at that time, definitely it will be a termination of pregnancy at whatever gestation age the patient is presenting.
Actually, she was a booked patient, na, in first trimester or early.
No, ma'am. She was treated at Betul. She had come from Betul.
Ultrasound was not done.
Ultrasound was not done, ma'am. Yeah, that is what I wanted to actually give the message, that even if the patient is presenting repeatedly to you with similar complaints, we must do one ultrasonography. That's what I wanted to give the message through this case, basically.
Yes, because urinary symptoms are so common during pregnancy.
Very common. And especially if the hematuria is there, we can definitely look, even if we are not suspecting bladder carcinoma, we must look for if there's any calculi, or if there's any renal calculi or bladder calculi, that definitely can be ruled out. So for that also, we need to do one scan and check what exactly the patient is presenting with.
So scanning is important, and if a patient has repeated urinary symptoms, it is important.
Yes, ma'am.
Second thing is, whenever there is hematuria, one should always have a high index of suspicion, because it may be there in cystitis, but repeated hematuria, one should make you think of.
We must look for some bladder. We must suspect any bladder tumors in that. And in fact, ma'am, very interesting case. When I was reading for this, I came across a very interesting case of bladder endometriosis. Even that patient has presented with almost 5 by 4 centimeter mass, and it was treated as a bladder tumor. And on histopathology, it came as endometriosis. So basically, it was a bladder endometriosis which was causing and very typically she used to bleed every month. Yes,
that's great.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. So that is only one case which has been reported. But yes, even bladder carcinoma, there are hardly any guidelines given or hardly any.
There is paucity of information on this topic.
Yes.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
But this patient was lucky, and you were also lucky. This was stage 1.
Yes, very fortunate, because it was
this patient would have been in having invasive malignancy.
Yes. Even the squamous cell carcinomas and all will be very difficult to treat, ma'am. This was a very fortunate case. But it has been given that mostly even with the bladder tumors which present less than 40 years of age, 90% of the times it. So hopefully the treatment is restricted to the transurethral resection.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Actually, you are trying to say something. Ma'am, you are muted.
Where is Leena?
Unmute.
Leena, ali hai ka?
Oh, I'm asking her to unmute.
Very, very well represented, Swati. I would just like to make a note that just don't concentrate in your own field. See, whenever patient of pregnancy comes to you with any such thing, we always consider it as UTI. That is what you have. I mean, you have widened your region, and that's why you could pick up this case. So many times, such kind of patients, they come to us with repeated urinary tract infection. Urine examination is very, very important, especially in terms of RBCs and epithelial casts. Epithelial cast may suggest celiac or autoimmune preponderance.
Definitely.
Here, another DD can be, obviously you saw the mass, so it was CA bladder, no doubt. But sometimes even tuberculosis of bladder can be presented like that.
Yes.
So we just have to widen our vision and think broadly.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Similarly, because it was stage 0 cancer, weightage was given to both maternal and fetal survival.
Absolutely.
Advanced malignancy, we never look at the fetal survival. Mother is primary.
Absolutely.
With a managed case.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's a question in the chat box as well. What should be advised if patient wants to conceive again? What is the decent time interval?
Yeah. Ma'am, if we are doing a follow-up for 6 months and there's no growth, then we do it every 3 monthly, the follow-up with ultrasonography. and the patient can conceive normally, like how the other normal patients would conceive. But only thing is, again, because pregnancy is a state of immunosuppression, the chance of recurrence during the pregnancy would be little higher. So you have to be really cautious if she conceives again.
And I just had one, not a query in fact, but if she had symptoms in the first trimester, the
Yes.
first trimester ultrasound is generally transvaginal where the bladder is empty.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering whether we can pick up these masses on transvaginal ultrasound when the bladder is not full. Of course, if it's repeated hematuria, then it's prudent to fill up her bladder and go transabdominally as well.
Yes, yes.
But generally, I'm saying just one scan wouldn't have detected that mass, even
No,
if with
ma'am.
one episode of hematuria and transvaginal ultrasound.
Yeah, maybe not one scan, but since patient was presenting
Yes, with repeated symptoms,
yes,
definitely.
Yes.
But first scan wouldn't have. With transvaginal, the bladder is empty.
Yes, very true.
Yeah, right.
One more point I want, when I was reading, and last year I came across a case of urinary meiosis. That time I read one of the most important cause of bladder malignancy in our country is schistosomiasis, which also presents with hematuria. And on cystoscopy, you can see the multiple fibrotic areas in that.
Okay.
So cystoscopy is helpful in that also.
Absolutely.
But I was not aware that this is one of the causes of bladder malignancy and hematuria.
I didn't come across I read about so many cases, but I didn't come across.
Today when I went through the cases, I saw that reference again.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Let us move to our second case. Second case will be presented by Dr. Alia Amreen. She is presenting a case of pregnancy in a case of MEN2 with bilateral pheochromocytoma. MEN2 is multiple endocrine neoplasia type 2. Isn't it, Sumit? Because when Sumit told me, I asked her, what is this?
Yes, madam. Multiple endocrine neoplasia syndrome.
I had to Google.
Dr. Gandhi sir has also joined us. Shall I start, ma'am? Alia, you can start sharing your screen. Yes, ma'am.
Welcome, Dr. Gandhi. Yeah, you can unmute.
Thank you, madam.
Happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm making you the co-host so that you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Shall I start, ma'am?
Yes, please start.
A very good evening to everyone present here. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Vaidehi Marathe Madam, the President of NOGS, Dr. Rajyasree Sen Gupta Ma'am, Secretary NOGS, and a very special thanks to Dr. Sumit Baheti Ma'am, Clinical Secretary NOGS. And thank you to the chairpersons, Dr. Sulbha Joshi Ma'am and Dr. Leena Kalmege Ma'am, for giving us an opportunity to present this case. Myself, Dr. Alia Amreen, I'm working at Kingsway Hospital under the guidance of Dr. Sumit Baheti Ma'am. I'm presenting this case, which is the management of a case of a pregnancy with multiple endocrine neoplasm type 2B with bilateral pheochromocytoma. Our patient, Mrs. X, she's a 30 years old female. She's married since 1 year. She's a primigravida with 8 months of amenorrhea, 31 weeks, 2 days by dates, and she was a diagnosed case of multiple endocrine neoplasia syndrome type 2. She was admitted with us on 19th of December 2020 with complaint of headache, nausea since 2 days with accelerated hypertension. She was perceiving adequate fetal movements. There was no complaint of pain in abdomen, leaking or bleeding per vaginum. There was no complaint of cough, cold, difficulty in breathing. Her past menstrual cycles were regular. Her last menstrual period date was 14th of May 2020, and her expected date of delivery was 21st of February 2021. So according to this, by days, she was of 31 weeks, 2 days of gestational age. She was a primigravida, married since 1 year. It was a non-consanguineous marriage, and she conceived spontaneously. Her past history includes she was a diagnosed case of medullary carcinoma of thyroid with hepatic metastasis. In 2005, she underwent total thyroidectomy at GMCH Nagpur. Since then, she was on thyroid replacement medication at a dose of 125 microgram OD. On follow-up with the endocrinologist, Dr. Pramod Gandhi sir, her ultrasound abdomen showed bilateral enlarged adrenal glands with hepatic metastasis. So she was diagnosed as a case of multiple endocrine neoplasm type 2, and she was started on prazosin 2.5 milligrams high blood pressure readings. Then she lost follow-up with with Dr. Gandhi sir. She came to us after she got married with a UPT positive test, and she was complaining of spotting PV since last 2-3 days. Considering her prior history, we evaluated her further, and she underwent, we did an MRI for her upper abdomen on 29 June 2020, which showed bilateral adrenal glands were replaced with heterogeneous complex, predominantly solid and smaller cystic appearing nodular lesions. Findings were likely representing bilateral pheochromocytoma. Multiple abnormal signal focal lesions scattered in both the lobes of liver. There was a possibility of metastatic etiology. She was evaluated further. Her 24 hours urine metanephrines were highly raised, and metanephrine creatinine ratio and normetanephrine creatinine ratio were also raised. These are the pictures of her MRI upper abdomen, which are showing the enlarged adrenal glands and the hepatic metastasis. A multidisciplinary team discussion were made. Detailed discussion was done with the patient and the family regarding the risk and the complications of continuing the pregnancy and the need for continued monitoring for mother and fetus throughout the pregnancy. The option of termination of pregnancy was also discussed with them, but they decided to continue with the pregnancy. The option of adrenalectomy in the second trimester of pregnancy was proposed to them, and the patient and relatives were agreed for it. On ultrasound obstetrics, there was early pregnancy ultrasound. There was a single live intrauterine gestation, 9 weeks, 3 days. Her USD EDD was 18th of February 2021. It also showed a subserosal fibroid measuring 4.7 by 4.1 by 4.5 centimeter, which was present over the posterior aspect of lower uterine segment and the cervix. Her routine antenatal investigations were done. She was started on folic acid supplements and the progesterone support. Her thyroid replacement medicines were continued at the dose of 125 microgram, and prazosin 2.5 milligram OD dose was going on. Her NT-scan and double marker tests were done at the end of the first trimester and found to be low risk. During second trimester, the congenital malformation scan was done, which was normal. Continued with the routine antenatal care along with the thyroid replacement and the prazosin at the same doses. She received injection tetanus. Patient was planned for a laparoscopic adrenalectomy after detailed discussion with the endocrinologist, urologist, anesthesiologist, and the obstetrician, and the relatives and the patient. But patient lost the follow-up in between. And when she came back to us at 19 weeks of gestation, during her pre-op workup, she was diagnosed as COVID positive.
Yeah.
Hence,
Alia,
yeah.
Alia, can I interrupt for a minute? There are 2-3 comments in the chat box that the slides are not clear. For me, they are clear. I'm not sure why the others, they are not able to see well. Can everyone just quickly post in the chat box whether they are able to see or not? Dr. Vandana, Dr. Bhavna, then Dr. Madhur, all of them are saying they're blurred. What about you, Sumi?
I am seeing it clearly.
Hello, even I can.
Yeah, they are. It's
Swati, is it clear for you as well?
Ma'am, it's slightly blurred, but it's visible. And I think one more box is open, one more window is open.
Can you just guide her what to do that for that? Always that with the cursor that the blocks we get. Can you just tell her?
Alia, can you just stop sharing? First, close all other windows and keep only PPT open, and then share again.
Okay, ma'am.
Open the PPT and minimize it, and then share it. Close all other windows.
Yes, ma'am. अब ठीक है मैम?
वो बॉक्स नहीं जा रहा है स्वाति, उसका वो जो साइड में आ रहा है, वो जो कर्सर की वजह से आता है। स्वाति अनम्यूट कर।
Alia, I think some more boxes are open. Are all the windows
it's only
closed, Alia, on your side?
Only the Zoom and the PPT. Rest all are closed, ma'am.
I think
No,
the
we can
cursor,
see-
when she moves the cursor,
Yeah.
then I think that box appears.
I
Are
think
you
go
moving the
ahead,
cursor?
Okay.
You don't move the cursor and go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. Sure. Shall I continue, ma'am?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
during
Sorry for bothering you.
No, ma'am. During second trimester, her congenital malformation scan was done, which was normal. She was continued with the routine antenatal care along with the thyroid replacement and prazosin with the same doses. She received injection tetanus. Patient was planned for laparoscopic adrenalectomy after detailed discussion with the endocrinologist, urologist, anesthesiologist, and the obstetrician, and the relatives and the patient. But we lost her during for quite some time, and when she returned to it at 19 weeks of gestational age, during her pre-op workup, she was diagnosed to be as COVID positive. Hence, the proposed surgery was abandoned in view of high risk of anesthesia and the surgery. Patient and relatives were counseled accordingly. Patient was advised home quarantine for next 3 weeks. BP was well controlled with prazosin 2.5 milligram OD dose till 25 weeks of gestational age. At 25 weeks, due to rising BP, the dose of prazosin was increased to 5 milligram OD, and hence the growth scan was done at 25 weeks, which showed fetus was growing appropriately with the gestation, and there was the Lycor was adequate. At continued BP monitoring was done after then. At 27 weeks, BP was still high, so prazosin dose was increased to 5 milligram BD, and labetalol was also added at the dose of 50 milligram BD. Fetal well-being was monitored. So on admission, her at gestational age of 31 weeks 2 days, we admitted her with there was no warning signs and symptoms of impending eclampsia. On examination, she was conscious, she was well oriented to time, place, and person. She was afebrile. Her SpO2 was maintaining 98% on room air. Pulse rate was 86 per minute regular. Her blood pressure was 200 by 120 milligram mm of mercury in right arm position, in supine position, and 180 by 110 millimeter of mercury in right arm in sitting position. Pallor was present, deep tendon reflexes were normal, breast was normal. On per abdominal examination, uterus was around 30 to 32 weeks of gestation size, longitudinal lie, cephalic presentation, fetal heart sounds were present, 148 per minute regular, uterus was relaxed, and Lycor was seen to be less than adequate. Urine albumin was trace, and urine sugar and ketones were nil. So as per all these things, my provisional diagnosis was she is the case of primary gravida with 31 weeks, 2 days of gestation with single fetus in longitudinal lie cephalic presentation with known case of multiple endocrine neoplasia type 2 with bilateral pheochromocytoma with hypothyroidism with accelerated hypertension with oligohydramnios with intrauterine growth retardation. Patient was managed conservatively with continuous BP monitoring, and antihypertensives, prazosin, labetalol, and Nicardia were given to her. Fetal well-being was monitored. Intermittently, she had accelerated BP readings. After receiving the first dose of injection betamethasone for fetal lung maturity, her BP went uncontrolled. In view of uncontrolled hypertension with oligohydramnios and intrauterine growth retardation and uteroplacental insufficiency, the decision of emergency LSCS was taken at the gestational age of 31 weeks, 6 days. Injection magnesium sulfate was given preoperatively for neuroprotection of the fetus. Intraoperative LSCS was performed under spinal anesthesia with a backup preparation of managing extreme hypertensive or hypotensive crisis in this case. A preterm male baby weighing 1 kg 315 grams was delivered. The baby cried immediately at birth. Baby was shifted to NICU. Intraoperatively, the BP was well maintained, bleeding was average, and urine output was maintained throughout the OT. During post-op period, patient was shifted to ICU. There were continuous BP monitoring was done. In immediate post-op period, her BP shooted up to 220 by 180 millimeter of mercury. We had started injection nitroglycerin infusion for her, and we had titrated the doses according to her BP readings. On post-op day 1, at the concentration, injection nitroglycerin at the concentration of 25 milligram per 50 ml at the rate of 10 ml per hour was started to her. According to her BP readings, on post-op day 2, it was titrated up to 6 ml per hour, and on post-op day 3, it was titrated up to 3 ml per hour. And then slowly the titration was made to 3 ml per hour, and then it was stopped, and she was shifted to oral antihypertensive drugs, which included prazosin, labetalol. Her BP was coming under control, hence the decision of shifting to oral antihypertensives were made. She received antibiotics, IV fluids, oxytocin, and thyroid replacement medications. Vitals were well maintained. Her urine output was also adequate. From day 3 onwards, tablet clinidipine 10 milligram OD, tablet prazosin 5 milligram BD, and tablet labetalol 100 milligram BD was started. Patient was shifted to room on post-op day 3. Routine postnatal care were continued. She was discharged in hemodynamically stable condition on post-op day 7. She was advised BP monitoring and continued follow-up. And we are planning a laparoscopic stage adrenalectomy and the follow-up of the hepatic metastasis for her. And as far as the baby was concerned, baby was in NICU. He was managed on day 1. Baby was put on CPAP, received surfactant for fetal lung maturity. On day 2, CPAP was removed. Baby was maintaining saturation with oxygen by hood. And on day 3, baby started to maintain the saturation on room air. And feeding was also started. Feeds were tolerated and gradually increased. The baby was stable and gaining weight throughout the NICU stay. Baby was discharged on day 21 with a weight of 1 kilogram, 55 grams. So something about multiple endocrine neoplasia. Multiple endocrine neoplasia is characterized by predilection for tumors involving 2 or more endocrine glands. It has majorly 4 forms: MEN type 1, MEN type 2, MEN type 3, which is also known as 2B, and MEN type 4. In MEN 2, it is characterized by medullary thyroid carcinoma and pheochromocytomas, and MEN 2A also has parathyroid hyperplasia, whereas in MEN 2B, there is a mucosal neuromas. Pheochromocytoma is a neuroendocrine tumor of chromaffin cells of the adrenal medulla that secretes catecholamines. Extra-adrenal pheochromocytomas, paragangliomas are less common and arise from the sympathetic ganglia. Although the occurrence is sporadic in the majority of cases, up to 25% of cases may be syndrome associated, like our patient. The syndrome like von Hippel-Lindau syndrome, multiple endocrine neoplasia, and neurofibromatosis type 1. The catecholamine effects from the pheochromocytoma may lead to presentations with paroxysmal or sustained hypertension, episodic headache, sweating, and tachycardia. Symptoms may be severe, and patients may present with pheochromocytoma crisis, characterized by multiple organ failures, severe blood pressure variability, high fever, encephalopathy with resultant cardiometabolic sequelae. 24 hours urinary catecholamine test is used for the diagnosis. Pheochromocytoma in pregnancy is very, very rare. The prevalence is just 1 in 54,000 pregnancy. The world literature have very few cases reported till now, and that too the bilateral cases, bilateral pheochromocytoma in pregnancy are even rarer. The supine position during pregnancy results in the gravid uterus compressing the tumor, thus causing a paradoxical supine hypertension with normal BP in the sitting or erect position. It is important to distinguish pheochromocytoma in pregnancy from preeclampsia due to its non-specific presentation. Episodes of hypertension in patients with preeclampsia tend to be uniform throughout the day, whereas in pheochromocytoma, the hypertension episodes may be paroxysmal and they do not have a pattern of onset. It is uncommon for preeclampsia to present with paroxysmal hypertension and to affect women before 20 weeks of gestation. Maternal and fetal mortality rate is high in untreated cases, and mortality is reduced drastically in treated cases. Hence, the need for early diagnosis is must. The take-home message is that the integrated and multidisciplinary team approach with close communication among the endocrinologist, obstetrician, urologist, anesthesiologist, and even intensivist is paramount to achieve excellent outcomes in women with pheochromocytoma with pregnancy. So the early diagnosis and continued maternal and fetal well-being monitoring can be beneficial in preventing fatal complications in patients of pheochromocytoma in pregnancy. Thank you.
Thank you. Very nicely presented.
Thank you, ma'am.
Such a rare case. I just wanted to ask Dr. Gandhi why the surgery was not advised when she came at means in 2017.
Madam, this is a first of all, thank you for inviting me in NOGS forum. It's an extremely rare case. This patient was diagnosed as MEN2 in the, she had been diagnosed as medullary carcinoma thyroid in 2005, and then she was operated. Then she came in 2000, straight away she came in 2017 when we investigated. Whenever a patient of MTC comes to us, we always investigate for MEN. So she was investigated and she was advised surgery that time also. But since the patient was absolutely asymptomatic, her blood pressure was normal, and this is extremely unusual to see a bilateral large pheochromocytoma with normal blood pressure. And hence patient disappeared. Since 2017 till 2019, she never came for follow-up. I tried to contact her also in between once or twice, but then they never came back. She was an interesting case, that's why I called her. Then when she came straight away with pregnancy. So it's extremely rare to see pheochromocytoma with pregnancy. That too, most of the cases which are reported in the literature are unilateral pheochromocytoma with pregnancy. This is a bilateral pheochromocytoma. That too large, almost 7 to 8 centimeter large size tumor, which is a huge tumor, we say, in terms of pheochromocytoma. But again, with such large tumor also, she was maintaining normal blood pressure.
But she was put on prazosin, no? That time also?
Day one, 2017 onwards only, I had started alpha blockers. Because patients are known to have wide fluctuations in blood pressure at any time. They can present with hypotension, they can present with hypertensive crisis. Both extremes can be seen. She was put on alpha blockers.
And what about these mets? Liver mets were from thyroid or adrenal?
Unfortunately, we could not evaluate the reason for liver mets as of now, because this time when she came, in between she lost follow-up. This time when she came with pregnancy. So ideally, we should do MIBG scan, which is a very active material. From that, we need to find out whether these liver mets are secondaries from pheochromocytoma. It's a neuroendocrine tumor which is also present in the liver, or whether it is secondaries from the old medullary carcinoma of thyroid. We don't know. As of now, we do not know. We are going to evaluate it in on follow-up. So such a large bilateral pheochromocytoma with pregnancy, mortality and morbidity is extremely high. And we had seen this patient was always normotensive, always maintaining blood pressure, but suddenly at the time of delivery, almost 31, 32 weeks, she went in severe hypertension, 220, 120 with full dose of alpha blockers, beta blockers. She was not responding.
Yes, that is known in third trimester. These patients.
Yeah, the pregnancy compresses tumor, releases lot of norepinephrine.
Yeah,
adrenal gland.
In continuation with this, Dr. Gandhi, there is one question: why was nitroglycerin infusion preferred over labetalol? So, if you can answer that.
See, it's very easy to manage hypertensive crisis with nitroglycerin. You can control it very easily. The duration of action of nitroglycerin is few minutes. IV NTG. So it's extremely easy. Second, whenever in patients with pheochromocytoma, you should always achieve good alpha blockade first, and then only you should give beta blockers. This patient, we had given alpha blockers, and then we started labetalol. But at the time of delivery, we had to stop all oral antihypertensive drugs. So we had to stop even NTG, alpha blockers also. So by giving beta blockers only, there is unopposed alpha action, and patient can present with hypertensive crisis. So it should be avoided.
One question for Dr. Gandhi.
Yes, ma'am.
Labetalol has got alpha adrenergic component as well.
Yeah.
That's why they are not preferred in patients with pheochromocytoma. That is what is said. And what we read in our books is that beta blockers increases BP, suggests pheochromocytoma.
Yes. So only beta blockers increases blood pressure.
Yeah.
But you achieve good alpha blockade and they add beta blockers.
Yeah.
It is recommended in pheochromocytoma.
So what
that gives a good blood pressure.
Yeah. So what should be the preferable antihypertensives? One is prazosin.
Phenoxybenzamin.
Phenoxybenzamin. Yeah.
Phenoxybenzamin is the best antihypertensive in hypertensive crisis. But this patient was always normotensive, and we wanted to give low dose alpha blockers. That's why we used to give prazosin.
Because sometime or the other, with pheochromocytoma, with catecholamic hyperactivity, we are expecting this patient to land up in crisis somewhere.
Yes.
So we should have battery of antihypertensives ready. First is prazosin, and then not labetalol as a first choice.
Labetalol IV should never be used.
Even
for control of blood pressure, and then beta blocker is a better choice than adding calcium channel blocker also in this patient.
So now obstetrician's job is over. It is a challenge for Dr. Gandhi.
Yes.
Thank you, madam.
And there is one more question. What is the ideal time for adrenalectomy postpartum?
Whenever gynecologists permit me, ideally, I spoke to Sumit on this issue. She said at least 6 to 8 weeks after delivery. That's what she said.
Yes.
She will be able to answer it.
So whenever the patient agrees after that, maybe.
Yeah, immediately, as early as possible.
This patient is not intelligent, I think. Isn't it?
Illiterate. Patient is illiterate.
Yeah. That's why she didn't come for follow-up in spite of you calling them so many times.
Yeah. In fact,
In
I'll
between
tell you,
also?
we had planned for surgery in second trimester. That time it was a real tragedy. We planned surgery initially. There were some problems in hospital, and then we said after 2 weeks we will plan surgery. After 2 weeks she disappeared. She never came for follow-up. At least Sumit has called this patient for at least 8 to 10 times, and still she was not ready to come to hospital. Then I called twice. Then she came once, and then I tried to convince her.
Then we convinced her for
She should get operated as early as possible. And then this patient came. I remember it was Saturday. We decided her to operate on Tuesday.
Monday.
Tuesday, and Monday morning we did her COVID, and it turned out to be positive.
COVID report came positive.
So our anesthetists were not ready. It was
Really unlucky.
for us also to operate at that. So again, 21 days gone. So that's the reason we lost the whole second trimester. That was the ideal time when we should have operated, because we required to. I spoke to the urosurgeon, Dr. Ridolkar. He said we needed 2-stage surgery. We can't operate both sides in one sitting.
Right.
There is a role of adrenalectomy with cesarean section in the same sitting.
No, it's difficult, madam.
Actually, means literature shows it's written either you.
It's only for unilateral adrenal adenoma. It is recommended if it is small and patient is stable. There is no hypertension. It is done. There are few cases where it is, but it is only for unilateral.
Actually, postpartum period
large.
You cannot predict postpartum collapse.
Yes. You cannot predict.
You cannot plan
Right.
such turbulent cases.
Yeah, I'll request Dr. Vandana to spell out her question. I could not understand what she has written in the chat box. Dr. Vandana, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's a very new topic and nice presentation about men. We do get endocrine disorders in pregnancy, such as majority times hypothyroid, thyroid carcinomas. Plus, we get diabetes also. As per the classification, Dr. Alia said that this will be like related to pheochromocytoma and thyroid papillary or neurofibromatosis. So I would like to know a question to Dr. Pramod, that how you are going to tell us that what will be your message, that which cases we should suspect men and which cases we should able to diagnose or investigate further, because your case also did not have any hypertension initially, and later on, because of hypertension and your investigation, 24 hours these 24-hour urinary catecholamines were done, and then it was diagnosed. So I just want you to tell us that how we should proceed in such cases.
Yeah, first of all, when you classify the thyroid malignancies, there are different types of malignancy like papillary carcinoma, follicular carcinoma, medullary carcinoma, and anaplastic carcinoma. These are the four broad categories, out of which only medullary carcinoma of thyroid is associated with main syndromes. Papillary and follicular are not at all associated with main syndrome. So all patients of medullary carcinoma, which itself is a rare entity, we must rule out pheochromocytoma in these patients. Second, any patient with severe hypercalcemia where we suspect parathyroid adenoma, there also we need to rule out MEN1. In MEN1, we don't see pheochromocytoma. In MEN1, we see pituitary tumor, parathyroid tumors, and that's the reason we don't screen for MEN1 in this patient. But only medullary carcinoma of thyroid is associated with. So whenever you have a diagnosis of medullary carcinoma, then only you should investigate for phe.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gandhi.
Thank you,
Thank you, Dr. Alia and Sumit. You made us read this because I was not aware of this syndrome.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Now we will proceed
Thank you,
with
sir.
our third case, which is not that rare. Means relatively it is common, we should say. Myasthenia gravis with pregnancy. And Dr. Snehal Lele is going to present this case. Rujuta Phuke is her guide, and this case is from GMC Nagpur. Dr. Snehal is there?
Ahena Snehal. Snehal, you can unmute. You are the co-host now.
Snehal, start your presentation.
1 minute. Let me just. You're the co-host, Snehal. You can unmute. Snehal, you are the co-host. You can unmute. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. You can start sharing your screen. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. Myself, Dr. Snehal Lede from resident Dr. GMCH Nagpur. I am presenting a case of myasthenia gravis under the guidance of Dr. Rujuta Phuke, ma'am.
Snehal, your presentation is not visible. We can only see your Zoom window. We can't see your presentation. We can only see the Zoom window. You stop share and again reshare your screen. Yeah, now it's possible. Now it's visible. Make it
Yes.
full screen.
Yes. It is visible to everyone.
Yes.
Yes,
full
Nehal, it is
screen. Make
visible.
it full
Please
screen.
make it slideshow.
Yes, ma'am.
Make it full screen. उसके बाजू में. Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening to everyone. Myself, Dr. Snehal Lede, resident doctor, GMCH Nagpur. I am presenting a case of myasthenia gravis under the guidance of Dr. Juda Fuki, ma'am, associate professor, OBGY department, GMCH Nagpur. A 28-year-old female resident of Karbi, Nagpur, booked case at ANC OPD of GMCH Nagpur, admitted in the emergency hours with chief complaining of pain in abdomen since 9 p.m. and complaining of leaking per vaginum since 11 p.m. She was married since 2 years, primary gravida, conceived spontaneously. Previous menstrual cycles are regular with average flow. LMP was 5th April 2019 and EDD was 12 January 2021. She by date, gestational age by date was 37 weeks 5 days. She was diagnosed as a case of myasthenia gravis since 2015 at the age of 25 years, confirmed by electromyography test, positive and by positive serological test. She started on oral medication, that is acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, immunosuppressant, steroids, that is tablet pyridostigmine, tablet azathioprine, and tablet prednisolone. She had a crisis episode in the July 2016, hospitalized for that and received 5 cycles of plasmapheresis and 19 doses of injection IVIG. She's on at that time she was on ventilatory support. She married in 2017, visited OPD as a referral from neurology department, super specialty hospital Nagpur for preconceptional counseling as patient wanted to conceive. After expert opinion with neurologist, she was advised for surgical approach, that is thymectomy, for better outcome of pregnancy. She underwent thymectomy in 2017 private hospital in Nagpur. Her post-operative course was uneventful. She started on acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, immunosuppression, and steroid drug for 1 year, and then drugs are withdrawn as she was asymptomatic. She conceived spontaneously. Consult regarding exacerbation of myasthenia gravis in pregnancy and registered under ANC OPD of GMCH Nagpur for regular follow-up. During her first visit, neurology opinion taken in view of management as she was asymptomatic. She not started on any medication, only folic acid, vitamin D and calcium was given. She had 7 ANC visits at GMCH Nagpur, routine ANC workup done, asymptomatic during her whole of the ANC period. Patient was known case of hypothyroidism and on tablet Thyrox 100 microgram OD. She received 2 doses of injection tetanus toxoid and there is no history of myasthenia gravis in other family members. Patient was conscious oriented in time place on examination. She was conscious oriented in time place and person. BP was 110/70, pulse rate 80, SP2 98%, pallor was present, no icterus, no cyanosis, no clubbing, superficial reflexes are present, deep tendon reflexes are present, power 5/5 in all the limbs and no evidence of ptosis. On palpation, fundal height correspond to 36 weeks cephalic presentation, FHS 140 regular, uterus mild contraction present. Per vaginal examination, patient was in latent phase of labor. Patient was kept for spontaneous vaginal delivery with assistant during second stage of labor to cut short the second stage according to guidelines, but she landed up to into cesarean section. Primary gravida with 37 weeks, provisional diagnosis. Primary gravida with 37 weeks 5 days with known case of myasthenia gravis with hypothyroidism with premature rupture of membrane and there was leaking since 15 hours. LSCS done under spinal anesthesia in view of primary gravida with 37 weeks 5 days with myasthenia gravis with PRM of more than 18 hours with non-progressive labor. A full male born on 25 December 2020 at 3:50 p.m. with birth weight of 2.7 kg. Apgar at 1 minute was 6/10 for 5 days. Operative procedure was uneventful in surgical and anesthesia point of view. Baby was observed for 72 hours visits in newborn. There was no any abnormality observed. Myasthenia gravis is neuromuscular disorder characterized by weakness and fatigability of skeletal muscle. There is a decrease in number of available acetylcholine receptor at neuromuscular junction due to antibody-mediated autoimmune attack. And pathogenic antibodies are IgG T-cell dependent. The thymus is abnormal in 75% of patients of myasthenia gravis, hyperplastic in 65%, 10% have thymic tumors. Women are affected in second and third decade, and In pregnancy, it was there can be exacerbation due to pregnancy is a immunosuppression state. There are studies supporting the thymectomy in myasthenia gravis in pregnancy. Effect of pregnancy and birth on the course of myasthenia gravis before or after transsternal radical thymectomy. There were 15 pregnancies has been followed retrospectively. All patients underwent transsternal radical thymectomy for myasthenia gravis. The course of myasthenia gravis in the period before, during, and after pregnancy was scored by Osserman classification for the effect of thymectomy on delivery and the newborn was evaluated. Patient were divided into two groups: pregnancy before and after. During pregnancy, in group 1 deterioration was observed, and in 7 patients the disease was unchanged. In group 2, 1 deterioration, 5 unchanged courses, and 1 improvement were observed. And in the postpartum period, in group 1, 7 patients did not change and 1 improved. In group 2, 2 deterioration, 3 unchanged courses, and 2 improvement were observed. Before pregnancy, group 2 patients were in a better Osserman stage in comparison with those in group 1. 8 of the 12 deliveries were spontaneous, 3 abortuses. Myasthenic symptoms were observed in 2 newborn in group 1. Our data suggests myasthenia gravis is not prohibitive to children. The course of myasthenia after transsternal radical thymectomy is often ameliorated. A better myasthenia gravis stage reached after thymectomy before pregnancy seems to be correlated with better course during pregnancy. Myasthenia gravis in a second studies were myasthenia gravis in it was studied in 69 cases. The review objective was to review our experience with pregnancy in women with myasthenia gravis. 69 pregnancy among 65 women with myasthenia gravis patient managed at over 28 years were included. The course of disease in pregnancy, mode of delivery, postpartum period were evaluated. One pregnancy miscarried. In 50% of patients, myasthenia gravis deteriorated in pregnancy, a further 60% in puerperium, and 70% pregnancy were delivered by cesarean section, one due to myasthenia exacerbation. All women with myasthenia gravis with transient neonatal myasthenia gravis was diagnosed in 30% of infant. Its incidence was inversely associated with maternal disease duration. Newborn of thymectomized mothers showed a lower rate of neonatal myasthenia compared to those of non-thymectomized women. Myasthenia gravis patient can have normal pregnancy and delivery, but the course is unpredictable, shorter disease history, and shorter disease history and infection predisposed to puerperal exacerbation. Maternal thymectomy lessens the likelihood of neonatal myasthenia gravis. Atracurium can exacerbate the symptoms of myasthenia gravis. During induction of general anesthesia, patient may land up into hypoxia due to decreased respiratory reserve in myasthenia gravis patient. As also the pregnancy also decreases the respiratory reserve due to gravid uterus. Effect of myasthenia gravis on regional anesthesia, there will be prolonged duration as already muscles are weak, so dose of drug required to be adjusted. Take home message: course of myasthenia gravis is unpredictable in pregnancy. Exacerbation can occur during first trimester and puerperium. Thymectomy before pregnancy can have better outcome during pregnancy and decreases the risk of neonatal myasthenia gravis. Thymectomy during pregnancy will be stressful. Vaginal delivery, so it should be done before pregnancy and preconceptional period. Vaginal delivery is preferred in myasthenia gravis patient. In case of preeclampsia patient, magnesium sulfate use is contraindicated. Thank you.
Great. Very nice presentation. Actually, she was an ideal patient. Whatever ideal thing has to be done was done in this patient, isn't it? Snehal?
Yes, ma'am.
If a patient of
yes,
myasthenia gravis comes for counseling, preconception counseling, what advice should be given? In this patient, thymectomy was advised. But is it advised in all patients?
Thymectomy was advised.
In all patients, do you advise thymectomy?
But during the pregnancy, there can be we have to counsel the patient that exacerbation can occur if there can be respiratory crisis. So patient can be the plasma there can be need of plasmapheresis or the IVIG. So the plasmapheresis, if during pregnancy plasmapheresis can be plasmapheresis can cause preterm labor. So there will be if the thymectomy can be performed before pregnancy, so it can be we have better outcome in the throughout the pregnancy.
If a patient has preterm labor, what will you give for neuroprotection? Because magnesium sulfate is contraindicated.
Contraindicated.
Neither for preterm nor for neuroprotection. Nexel can't be given.
Can be given.
Nehal, can you stop your screen share?
Yes, ma'am.
Actually, myasthenia gravis, if the diagnosis is of short duration, then crisis exacerbations are more. So it is always advised to delay the pregnancy, reach the remission, proper dose, and thymectomy preferred because exacerbations are less in patients with thymectomy, and neonatal myasthenia is less. So that is why we always recommend prior thymectomy to patients who want to conceive. So it's part of counseling. Pre-conception.
Prognosis is better in those patients who have, for neonatal as well as maternal, prognosis is good. There is something I read about some antibodies. Thymectomy is indicated with the MuSK antibodies if they are present.
Yeah, muscle serine kinase antibody.
Muscle
Yeah.
specific
So that is why these are the, investigations. So many IgG as well as this MuSK antibodies.
If these antibodies are present, then thymectomy is indicated, has to be done.
Yeah, but 60% of the patients, they get benefited from thymectomy irrespective.
Very interesting case.
Yeah.
Very nicely managed.
Very rare. All three cases were really wonderful, very unusual.
Another thing is
Wonderful.
that all these patients with autoantibodies, abnormal immune response. As such, these patients are known for any kind of exacerbations or adverse pregnancy outcomes. Even although myasthenia gravis is known to attack skeletal muscles, they don't affect the smooth muscles, that is what we say. But still, because abnormal immune response we know ultimately pregnancy is immunomodulation. So we can always expect any kind of turbulence at any stage. So better to do thymectomy and suppress the abnormal immune response to some extent. So in that perspective also, because every patient, as we know, pregnant, even though we say HDP, but the recent data says if you allow any patient to go till term, she will manifest with HDP sometime or other. So better to take out the main cause, thymus.
Yes. Perfect. Yeah, correct. Absolutely. Sumit, there's one question was for Dr. Gandhi, but if you can take this up, can you explain once more why to start alpha blockade first and then beta blockers?
Yeah, in these pheochromocytoma cases, there is a catecholamine excess, and that is why the alpha blockade is the first thing. And after alpha blockade, only the beta blockers should be added as and how they are needed. Yes. Because the main reason for the high BP is the surge of catecholamines in the blood.
Right. Okay, Dr. Madhuri, she wanted to ask a question to Dr. Gandhi, but she wants to discuss with you and Dr. Joshi, ma'am.
Yeah, actually, the similar case, it one close relative of mine had the similar case as the Sumit presented. Actually, she had, she stays in US, and she had after her first pregnancy, severe postpartum headache. For that, she was evaluated, and that time BP was actually there. The BP was checked, it was normal, and then MRI, everything was done, and over a period of time she got relieved. When she came to India, she just accidentally presented that there was a lump in the neck region, supraclavicular lesion. And when as my brother is radiologist, so when she was evaluated, he found that there is para-aortic lesion, and this lesion also in the neck, which is hypervascular. And then we thought that it might be some malignancy, metastatic or something. So we just she was taken for biopsy from the lymph node, from that mass, considering it can be a lymph node. So while taking biopsy, her BP shooted up. It was in the range of 200. And then thinking that why it shooted up, considering that whether it is a pheochromocytoma and all, because she had similar lesion in the abdomen also, suprarenal was normal. So then urinary catecholamines were done, and it was raised, and then she was diagnosed with that pheochromocytoma. After that, she was operated there, and this when the mass para-aortic was also removed, and the mass which was removed from here, it was metastatic of papillary thyroid carcinoma. So that was pheochromocytoma, which was in the para-aortic region, and the mass which was the nodular mass which was there in the neck region, it was metastatic of the papillary carcinoma of thyroid. My question was like, sir said that MEN2 pheochromocytoma and medullary carcinoma of the thyroid is associated.
Right.
And here, and the slides were reviewed and all experts' opinion was taken there also. So it was papillary carcinoma of thyroid. So Sumit, and Joshi ma'am also, in the literature also, I didn't get any association papillary carcinoma with pheochromocytoma. So, but she has this both. And one more question, in such patients, whether there is genetic preponderance, whether the family counseling was done for these patients' relatives.
It should be done.
Yes, it was done for this patient. Yes, the family counseling was done. Genetic predisposition was explained.
Yeah.
And for your case, the definition of multiple endocrine neoplasia includes medullary carcinoma of thyroid.
But it was papillary. That was something which was
definition includes medullary carcinoma.
It includes medullary. MEN2 includes medullary carcinoma.
Yes.
But that was actually, it can be reported also. She's my bhabhi only. She's close relative.
Maybe some case report.
Yeah.
Rare case.
How is she now, Madhuri? I remember this.
She's I've discussed with you. She's fine. She's doing well. Only the thing is that retrospectively, then I correlated when she had this after her first delivery, raised blood, severe headache, postpartum headache. They thought of postpartum venous thrombosis, and MRI was done, and I think that she might be having that component, and it might be a raised blood pressure fluctuation. Because there was no reason to have so much of headache, severe it was like throbbing headache she had without any reason. So it might be, and after 3-4 years she presented with this lump in the mass in the neck. So this is a typical presentation, but she's good.
Actually, it said prognosis is good. It all depends on the malignant potential. Once the surgery is done, prognosis is good.
Yes. Okay. Nice case, Sumit. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
All 3 cases were very, very interesting. Very nice.
Yes. Thank you, Sulbha Madam and Leena Madam, for chairing the sessions. Thank you, Dr. Swati Sarda, Dr. Alia, Dr. Snehal, Dr. Rujuta, for presenting and sharing the very interesting cases with us. Thank you very much. Over to Dr. Rajsi ma'am.
Thank you, Sumit. Wonderful as always. I won't take too long because Vaidehi ma'am needs to leave early. I'll like to thank all the presenters for today, Dr. Swati Sarda, Dr. Alia Amreen, and Dr. Snehal Lede, for wonderful presentation of extremely unique and rare presentations in pregnancy. All of you have managed your cases very well. It was really very interesting and a very stimulating academic discussion. Thank you so much. Also, special thanks to the mentors, Dr. Sumit Baheti, Dr. Pramod Gandhi sir, and Dr. Rujuta Phuke, for guiding and giving their inputs, special inputs for each management of each and every case. Really, your inputs made those cases even more interesting discussion. Thank you so much. I would like to thank the chairpersons for the clinical meeting today, Dr. Sulbha Joshi ma'am and Dr. Leena Karmeg ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, I can see Joshi madam, तुम्ही आजही किती सिन्सिअरली पूर्ण केसेसचा अभ्यास करून त्याच्यावर इनपुट्स देता. This is a hardcore teacher. Really worth learning from you. Thank you so much for being here today and gracing the occasion. And special thanks I must give in the end to our dear clinical secretary, Sumit, who has been taking so much efforts, and not only with the guidelines and protocols book, but also managing these clinical meetings every time. All our clinical meetings are fun, theme-based, and very well attended, very well discussed cases. So I must give her a special credit for managing the show very well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Of course, I have to thank the participants. So आपके बिना तो हर show अधूरा है. Thank you so much for logging in so many numbers and encouraging us every time. Not just the meetings, even our DGO GANs are successful only because of you guys. So please keep signing into our online CMEs and meetings.
Please give us your feedback and keep encouraging us. With this, I would like to sign out. Wish you all a very good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ma'am has left, I think, Sumit.
She has just left, I think.
Okay, okay. So should we leave the meeting now? Should we close
Yes.
the meeting?
Yes, yes.
Anything more to be done?
Nothing. Thank
Okay,
you.
great.
Thank
It was
you.
really nice. Great.
Yes.
Keep it up.
Thank you, madam. Bye.
See you soon. Bye.
Yeah, bye.